If Hamas is an idea as much as a military force, how is continuing to kill tens of thousands of people already suffering from pre-existing apartheid? Thank you, Matt. One of the people the world saw burned alive by the bombing at the Gaza hospital was Shaban al-Dalu, a 19-year-old engineering student who was still attached to an IV drip recovering from a previous bombing. And his story kind of speaks to how this isn't just about one attack. A 19-year-old having to provide for his family, repeatedly displaced, brought to hunger, bombed twice in a matter of days. This is a year, and this isn't out of nowhere. So how many more patients burned alive by U.S.
We don't want
bombs
to see any. No, we don't want to see any.
Well, I guess the U.S. has said, again and again, that no civilian loss is acceptable. 10,000 deaths ago, 20,000 deaths ago, and yet it's continued. So how does this answer mean anything without a policy shift?
It is an incredibly difficult environment that Israel operates in. And I'll just make clear, the thing that question leaves out, as often happens, and I understand why, is the burden that Hamas bears. And not just the burden that Hamas bears by hiding behind humans and using humans as civilian shields, but the burden that Hamas bears in not coming back to the table to try to get to a ceasefire. So Israel needs to do more to minimize civilian harm. Hamas needs to stop hiding behind human shields. Both of those things can be true. Both of those things are true. And ultimately, the horrific human toll over the past year is why we continue to push to get to a ceasefire, and why we want to see both sides agree to a ceasefire.
If Hamas is an idea as much as a military force, how is continuing to kill tens of thousands of people already suffering from pre-existing apartheid going to defeat that idea?
We have always made clear that you cannot defeat an idea through a military campaign. You can defeat Hamas's military wing, you can degrade Hamas's capabilities, but there has to be a political path forward for a future in Gaza without Hamas, and we've made that clear for the past year.
And then just to Humera's question earlier on the U.S. asking Israel for a new channel of communication about civilian harm, how has the U.S. and Israel been discussing civilian harm incidents up to this point, and why hasn't it taken a year and at least 42,000 people killed for the U.S. to consider that its approach for relying on Israel to stop hurting civilians is just insufficient?
We have long made clear that we want to see changes in their behavior. We haven't seen sufficient changes, and which is why we continue to press them.
To follow up on what she was asking, when you say that Israel has a right to strike terrorist targets in Beirut, but have to be concerned about the civilian casualties, the entire city is densely populated. Like, how could they attack terrorist targets in Beirut without there being civilian casualties?
I'm not going to get into prescribing the nature of a military campaign from here. It is a principle that's true for every country, that they have a right to defend themselves against terrorism. But we've had real concerns about the way we saw the bombing campaign in Beirut roll out over the last few weeks. Ryan said he had another question, so before you interrupt.
Well, maybe to her point, it goes to say, 20 years ago when Ariel Sharon attacked a Hamas commander in Gaza. The Bush administration, I'm sure you've seen this quote going around. The Bush administration says, this is outrageous. 8 civilians were killed. This is an unacceptable civilian toll. When dozens or hundreds of civilians are killed in attacks on Hezbollah leadership, there isn't even a statement accompanying it saying we regret the civilian toll. What changed?
Nothing changed. I just made very clear, as I made clear last week, we made clear since the beginning, that we were concerned about the loss of civilian life. We're always concerned about the loss of civilian life, and that continues to be the case.
Thank you, Matt. Just a clarification, so I can understand it. Why the letter? Just to make it more formal? As opposed to a phone call showing that this is a very urgent situation?
I think I just answered that in response to Kai's question. We have not seen sufficient results over the past few weeks. Continue to have concerns, which is why they laid out the changes that we want to see happen in this letter.
So, and why the 30 days? So must the 400,000 Palestinians wait 30 days? Some of them may starve by then,
the letter
be incinerated, as we have seen.
The letter is quite clear that we want to see changes immediately. And in fact, the secretary sent that letter on Sunday. We did see humanitarian assistance go in through Erez yesterday. And we very much want to see changes, not wait for 30 days, but happen immediately. Now, we recognize that some things, like, for example, the letter calls for agreements on what actually would be dual-use items. That's not something that can happen overnight. That requires a negotiation. So some things take a little bit longer, but there are changes that we want to see implemented immediately.
Let me just have a couple more on Gaza, then a couple on the West Bank. But, the Washington Post reported, I think yesterday, about the strike against Al-Aqsa Hospital in the middle of Gaza. striking the tents, burning people alive and so on. Now, Israel always says that there are militants, that we never know whether there were or not, but that seems to be a story that is repeated every day. The Gaza people wake up every day to another 100 people dead or something like this. Now, I asked you about this last week, and you said, no, we would never accept this being normalized, but in fact, it is being normalized.
It's not. What happened in that strike was horrifying. We understand the very difficult environment in which Israel operates, but the results of that strike were deeply disturbing. Mm-hmm. We all saw that video and all know that it's horrifying to see people burned to death. And we have made clear our serious concerns about the matter directly to the government of Israel.
Mm-hmm. Is it horrifying enough to be considered a war crime?
So I cannot make that kind of assessment from here. As you know, Saeed, there's a process that we have to go through to assess the facts of the law when it comes to any individual determination.
Yeah, but this seems to be going on every day, day in and day out. And, on the ceasefire talks, Haaretz is reporting that Israel is saying no more talks, no more negotiations. Can you comment on that?
So I cannot confirm what's reported, I assume based on anonymous sources. We have continued to engage with the government of Israel to try and get a ceasefire over the line. As you have heard us say, that requires not just Israel, but Hamas making difficult decisions. And it continues to be the case that Hamas is not at the bargaining table in any kind of a serious way to talk about how we get an agreement.
So you are still saying that if Hamas comes back to the table and they come up with, reasonable, whatever, stance and so on, talks will resume.
Of course they would. Okay. We are committed to a ceasefire agreement under the terms that the president laid out on May 31st and that was endorsed by the United Nations Security Council. Absolutely.
Now, Israel is going to seize the UN agency headquarters in Jerusalem. Do you have any comment on that and turn it into some sort of a settlement?
Yeah, so we have made clear that we have have made clear for some time that we believe the government of Israel's settlement program to be inconsistent with international law and continue to make that clear to the government of Israel.
So Israel killed at least 21 civilians in strike on Christian town in North Lebanon. They were displaced family rented this house so they can escape the horrific time where they lived in the south. Is it how Israel defending herself by carrying an attack in north of Lebanon in a Christian town that there's no existence of Hezbollah militias?
So I can't speak to the circumstances around that particular strike, but obviously the loss of civilian life is extremely troubling, and we've made that clear to the government of Israel.
Okay, there was a call between Secretary Blinken and Speaker of the House Berry. Can you just give us some insight about this call that lasted 40 minutes?
Sure. So the Secretary spoke to the Speaker of the Lebanese Parliament as well as to the Prime Minister on Friday to make clear that we want to see a diplomatic resolution to the conflict between Israel and Hezbollah, that we want that diplomatic resolution to include the full implementation of 1701, that we continue to support Lebanese institutions, including the Lebanese Armed Forces, which we see as a bulwark for stability in the country, and that we want to see Lebanon choose a new president, and that it's the Lebanese people and not anyone else that should make that decision. And he urged them to move forward with that process, as we have consistently made clear we want to see the government of Lebanon do.